May the words of my mouth and the meditation of all of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our God, our strength, and our Redeemer. Amen. Our gospel reading for this coming Sunday is the story of Jesus and his encounter with two disciples on the road to Emmaus. As it appears in the lectionary, it ends with Jesus breaking the bread and they realizing who Jesus is. As we read it today, it includes the return of those two disciples to Jerusalem to meet with the 11 and those who are gathered with them. The reason I did that is they really are of one piece. This is actually one story, one encounter that has two parts to it. And at the heart of it is these two bits related to food. Jesus, as he walks along with those two disciples, is interpreting the events that they've been telling him about. They told him about this Jesus, who they don't realize is walking next to them, and how he died and buried, and now there's stories that he's not there. And so he goes through this whole explanation from Moses onward, explaining what's going to happen with the Messiah. And they get to their end of the journey, and Jesus, I'm just going to keep going. And I said, no, it's getting late. You got to come with us. And literally, the description that's given is they kind of like drag Jesus along with them to their home for supper. It's not just like, we'd really like to have you come. It's like almost like, one on either elbow picking him up and carrying him along to make sure he's at their place. And he comes in and they sit down to eat. And then he takes bread, blesses it, breaks it, and in that moment, they suddenly recognize who it is that they're eating dinner with. And then he vanishes. But think of it, they're so excited about this that they get back and they journey all the way back to Jerusalem. That's like doing 10 kilometers. So basically, in their journey to their house and then their journey in the excitement, they've done a half marathon during the course of the day. That's a fair bit of walking. And I don't think it was on nice paved roads either. Those would be pretty inhospitable roads. And so they get back and they're with the disciples and they're explaining what's happened and here's, a hullabaloo is going on in the room, and suddenly Jesus appears in the midst of them. And they see him, and they're frightened. They think they're seeing a ghost. And Jesus says, no. Do I look like a ghost? You see I got hands, I got feet, I got bones, you can touch me? You can't do that with a ghost. And then he says, do you have anything to eat? And someone finds some broiled fish, and they give it to him, and he eats it, and so, oh yeah, it's Jesus. And then actually, we get the reverse. On the road to Emmaus, Jesus is explaining all of these things, and they recognize him after he breaks the bread. Here he eats the fish, and then he gives the same explanation that he gave while he was traveling on the road to Emmaus. But this time, they're more understanding because they realize it's Jesus that's talking to them. They understand these things. Now, some people, when they talk about this, the breaking of the bread and the eating together, it's like they think about the Eucharist. And certainly we think of broken bread in the Eucharist. But notice there's no wine in this story. This is not my body, my blood. But it does tell of bread and fish. There's a couple other times that we hear of bread and fish. Most notably, the feeding of the 5,000. Undoubtedly, as those disciples heard the story of breaking bread together and of eating fish, it's going to take them back to other meals they've had with Jesus. And particularly those, as Luke tells Jesus' story, he places a real emphasis on the number of times that Jesus eats with people. Eating with people was an important thing for Jesus. And it was also really important that he ate with all the people that he wasn't supposed to eat with. He's always showing up at places that he shouldn't be going to and sharing food with people. But most notably, it brings up this idea of the feeding of the 5,000. And the feeding of the 5,000 is one of those ideas or occasions where the vision of heaven comes to earth. There's a huge, huge crowd of people, and everyone's fed, and there's leftovers. It's a scene of abundance. It is a scene of new life. Even before the new life that comes in Christ's resurrection, there is a shadow, a foreshadowing of that new life in the way that Jesus feeds the people. Everyone is fed. In Matthew, it goes so far as 5,000 men plus women and children. Everyone is fed. There is never a shortage in God's love and in God's provision. We often make attempts to short-circuit that by saying, well, you get some if you deserve it, and we might give you some scraps once we're satisfied. But Jesus, as he appears to his disciples in the almost immediate aftermath of his resurrection, brings to mind, in the breaking of the bread and in the eating of the fish, this idea that the new life that is coming in Christ, that has come in Christ, is a life of abundance, and a life of abundance for everyone. Things have changed. And we're called to live into that abundance. We're called to live into that change. That change will not be complete until Christ returns. But we are called to live into it now as we await Christ's return. We are called to live out God's gracious giving in our own lives. It certainly isn't easy. That's the message that we hear today, that we see today. One writer goes, one of the ancient Christian traditions in reading this story of Emmaus was that it was as a result of Cleopas and whoever was with him providing an act of hospitality to this stranger. Because at this point to them, Jesus is a stranger. But inviting him back, being insistent that he come and stay with them. It was only after they demonstrated that sense of hospitality that Jesus breaks the bread and they can recognize him. Matter of fact, Jesus asks for something to eat. But in a sense, there's a bit of a failure on the disciples before that. Because if somebody comes to your house, one of the first things you're supposed to do is offer them something to eat. Not just as a sign of generosity, but also because they've likely been on the road. They've been traveling. They'll need something to sustain them. And the courtesy says, here's some food to help sustain you. Here's a welcome into our house. Here's a sign we are glad to see you. We are offering you a place to rest, a place of protection, because that is what hospitality offers in that culture. There's not a lot. There's the odd inn, but not necessarily the safest place as it goes. Hospitality is a form of sanctuary. Our sign up there says, sanctuary for the city. It means we intend and we try to offer hospitality, a safe place. That can be challenging because not everybody brings safety with them. But this is meant to be a place of safety, a place of welcome, a place of feeding, and not just physically, although that too. I say, Jesus is always feeding people. He's always eating with people. The hospitality is not only a Christian responsibility and duty, it's in hospitality and offering hospitality that we see Jesus. We see the risen Christ. We are meant to see Jesus in each other. We are meant to be aware of Jesus everywhere around us, in each person we encounter. And hospitality and offering hospitality helps us to do that.